Don't move. Not one more step.
I'm standing still.
You expect me to believe this is your house? In this neighborhood? With these homes? You think I'm just going to nod and walk away?
I bought it. My name's on the
I've been patrolling this street for years. I know the families here. I know the cars. I know the...
At 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon in a quiet cul-de-sac in the Maplewood Estates subdivision, two police officers pinned a black man face down on his own front lawn. He was wearing gym shorts and a faded navy t-shirt. His wrists were cuffed behind his back, pressed into the grass hard enough to draw blood. His name was on the mailbox 10 feet away. His military ID was on the kitchen counter just inside the front door, and his 7-year-old daughter stood in that doorway, screaming for her father, while an officer blocked her path with an outstretched arm. The man on the ground was Senior Chief Darnell Carter, an active-duty Navy SEAL with 17 years of decorated Special Operations service. He had survived combat deployments most people would never read about. He had carried wounded teammates through enemy fire. He had earned commendations that filled an entire drawer in his home office. And now he was face down on the lawn he mowed every Sunday morning, bleeding from the wrists, while his daughter begged strangers to stop hurting him. The neighbor who made the call stood on her porch 15 yards away, arms crossed, lips pressed together in a thin, satisfied line. She watched the scene like someone watching a plan come together. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because the next story is one you don't want to miss. Senior Chief Darnell Carter was 39 years old. He had spent more than half his life in uniform, 17 years in naval special warfare, rotating between combat deployments, advanced training cycles, and the rare stretches of quiet at home that never lasted long enough. He had been awarded the Bronze Star, 2 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals, and a Purple Heart he never talked about. His record was spotless. His reputation within his unit was simple. Darnell gets it done and keeps his people alive. 6 months earlier, he had purchased a 4-bedroom home in Maplewood Estates, a clean, tree-lined subdivision on the west side of the city. It was the kind of neighborhood with trimmed hedges, American flags on porches, and block parties in the summer. He had chosen it for one reason: his daughter, Zoe. She was 7, bright, fearless, and the only person in the world who could make him laugh until his chest hurt. Her mother, Darnell's wife, had passed from cancer 2 years prior. Since then, it had been just the two of them. Every morning followed the same rhythm. Darnell woke at 500, ran 3 miles through the neighborhood while the streets were still dark, then came home to make breakfast. Eggs, toast, fruit. Zoe always wanted pancakes. He gave in on Saturdays. By the time she was up, the kitchen smelled like syrup and coffee, and for a few hours, the world felt like something other than a mission. But the neighborhood had not welcomed them. Not openly. Not with slurs or signs. It was quieter than that. It was the way conversations stopped when he walked past. The way no one introduced themselves in the first month. The way HOA notices appeared on his door about the height of his grass 2 days after he moved in, while lawns on either side of him went untouched. And then there was the woman next door. Karen Whitfield was 58 years old and had lived on Maplewood Drive for 22 years. She was retired from an office management position at a local insurance firm and had appointed herself the unofficial coordinator of the Neighborhood Watch, a role no one had asked her to fill and no one had the energy to challenge. She knew every car that belonged on the street, every dog walker's schedule, every trash can that stayed out too long. She kept a spiral notebook on her kitchen counter where she logged anything she considered out of place. A van parked too long, an unfamiliar face on the sidewalk, a garage door left open past dark. Her husband Gerald, 61, was a quiet man who read the paper in his recliner and agreed with whatever Karen said, not because he believed it, but because disagreeing cost more energy than it was worth. He never questioned her calls, never asked her to stop, never once walked across the yard to introduce himself to the new neighbor. Karen had opposed the sale of the house from the beginning. Before Darnell had even moved in, she had written 3 emails to the HOA board expressing concerns about maintaining neighborhood character and preserving community standards. She never used the word race. She didn't have to. In the 6 months since Darnell moved in, Karen had called the police 8 times in connection with his property. Once for a plumber's van she didn't recognize. Once for a friend of Darnell's who sat in a parked car for 10 minutes waiting to be let in. Once for an Amazon delivery driver who walked to the side gate. Every call was logged by dispatch. Every call resulted in no violation, no arrest, no crime. But Karen kept calling, and she kept writing in her notebook. Times he left, times he returned, how many lights were on at night, whether the garage was open or closed. She watched his house the way a person watches something they believe doesn't belong. That Saturday afternoon, Darnell was in his open garage assembling a basketball hoop he had ordered for Zoe's birthday. The box was spread across the driveway, parts and bolts laid out on a towel, instructions pinned under a wrench. He had a small speaker playing music on the workbench and a glass of water beside it. Zoe was inside watching cartoons, checking through the window every few minutes to see how the hoop was coming along. It was the kind of scene that played out in driveways across the country every weekend. A father building something for his kid. Nothing more. But from her kitchen window, Karen Whitfield saw something different. She saw a black man in her neighbor's garage with tools and open boxes. She watched for less than 2 minutes before picking up her phone and dialing 911. The call was recorded. Her voice was calm, steady, almost rehearsed. She told the dispatcher there was a suspicious black male who appeared to be breaking into a garage at the address. She paused, then added that he could be armed and that she believed there was a child inside the house who might be in danger. Every word was chosen. The mention of a weapon guaranteed an elevated response. The mention of a child in danger ensured officers would arrive fast and arrive aggressive. She never once mentioned the possibility that the man might live there. She never said he was her neighbor. She never described the basketball hoop parts spread across the driveway or the music playing from a small speaker. She described a threat. A black man, possibly armed, near a child. And then she hung up and walked to her porch to wait. Within 4 minutes, dispatch sent 2 patrol units to the address. The call was flagged as a priority, and 2 officers were already reaching for their car doors before Karen had even sat down in her porch chair. The call went out at 2:43 p.m. 2 patrol units were dispatched to Maplewood Drive on a priority response. The dispatcher's notes read, "Suspicious male, possibly armed, child possibly in danger." That language changed everything. It moved the call from a routine check to a high-alert approach. Officers were told to expect a threat before they had even turned onto the street. The lead responder was Officer Ryan Briggs, 36 years old, 10 years with the department. Briggs had built a reputation that depended on who you asked. His supervisors described him as assertive and decisive. Officers who had worked calls with him used different words: aggressive, reactive, heavy-handed. Black residents in the surrounding neighborhoods knew him by pattern, if not by name. He was the officer who always seemed to show up when the call involved someone who looked like them, and who always seemed to find a reason to escalate. 4 formal complaints of excessive force had been filed against Briggs over the past 6 years. 2 involved black men detained during routine stops. 1 involved a teenager handcuffed on a sidewalk for matching a vague description. All 4 had been reviewed internally. All 4 had been dismissed. Briggs had never faced suspension, retraining, or formal discipline of any kind. His partner that afternoon was Officer Dana Sutton, 28, 2 years on the job. She was quiet, competent on paper, and entirely deferential to Briggs. She had never once questioned a decision he made on a call. She followed where he led, did what he did, and wrote her reports to match his. A 3rd unit arrived separately. Corporal James Fenton, 44, was a veteran officer with 18 years of service and a clean record. He had no complaints on file and was known among peers as measured and thorough. He parked at the end of the cul-de-sac and stayed near his vehicle, observing. He did not rush in. That decision, and everything that followed it, would matter later. Briggs and Sutton came in fast. Both patrol cars turned onto Maplewood Drive with lights flashing and sirens cutting through the quiet of the street. Tires barked against the curb as Briggs stopped his cruiser at an angle across the bottom of Darnell's driveway. Sutton pulled in behind him and swung wide to the left. Darnell heard them before he saw them. He set the drill down on the driveway, stepped clear of the basketball hoop parts, and turned toward the street with both hands open and visible at his sides. His posture was straight. His expression was calm. 17 years of training told him exactly what to do and exactly what not to do. Briggs was out of his vehicle before the engine fully stopped. His service weapon was drawn, both hands on the grip, barrel leveled at Darnell's chest from 20 feet away. "Get on the ground now! Hands where I can see them!" Darnell's voice was steady. "I live here. This is my house. My daughter is inside." Briggs moved closer, weapon still raised. "I said get on the ground!" Sutton came around the far side of the cruiser, hand on her holster, cutting off any path toward the side yard. Darnell did not move suddenly. He did not raise his voice. He lowered himself slowly, narrating every motion the way he had been trained. "I'm getting down. I'm kneeling. My hands are open. I am not armed." His knees touched the driveway, then his palms, then the grass at the edge of the lawn. And as Briggs closed the distance with his weapon still drawn, the front door opened. Zoe stood in the doorway in a pink t-shirt and shorts, her eyes wide, her small body frozen for 1 second before the scream came. "Daddy!" Sutton turned and moved toward the door, arm extended. "Get back inside, now!" Zoe didn't move. She screamed again, louder, reaching for her father. Across the street, a man named Victor Langley stepped off his porch, phone already raised and recording. He didn't say a word. He just held the camera steady and let it capture what was happening on Darnell Carter's front lawn. Briggs closed the distance in 3 steps. He grabbed the back of Darnell's neck and drove him forward, forcing his face into the grass. Darnell didn't resist. His arms stayed wide, palms open, fingers spread. Briggs dropped his knee into the center of Darnell's back and pressed down with his full weight. The air left Darnell's lungs in a sharp exhale. "I am not resisting," Darnell said through clenched teeth. "I live here. Please check my ID." Briggs pulled Darnell's wrists together behind his back and snapped the cuffs on hard, metal biting into skin. He yanked them tight, 1 extra click past what was necessary. Then he leaned down, his mouth close to Darnell's ear. "Stop talking." At the front door, Sutton stood with 1 arm across the frame, blocking Zoe from stepping outside. The child was shaking, tears running down her face, her small hands gripping the door frame. "Daddy! Let go of my daddy!" Sutton didn't bend down, didn't soften her voice. "Get inside, now. Close the door." Zoe didn't close the door. She stood there screaming, 7 years old, watching her father pinned to the ground by a man with a badge and a knee on his spine. Karen Whitfield walked slowly to the edge of her yard. She stood just past her property line, arms folded, watching the scene with an expression that held no alarm and no concern. She said nothing. Briggs searched Darnell's pockets roughly. Gym shorts, no wallet, no weapon, no contraband, nothing. Darnell's voice stayed controlled. "My military ID is on the kitchen counter. My name is on the mailbox. You can check both right now." Briggs didn't look at the mailbox, didn't glance at the front door. He leaned back on his knee and said, "People like you always have a story." From across the street, an older black couple stepped onto their porch. James and Beverly Washington, both in their late 60s, longtime residents of the street. Mr. Washington called out, "That man lives there. He's our neighbor. You're making a mistake." Briggs pointed at him without turning his head. "Sir, step back inside or I will arrest you for obstruction." Mrs. Washington grabbed her husband's arm. Her eyes were wet. They stayed on the porch. They did not go inside. Corporal James Fenton had been standing near his cruiser at the end of the cul-de-sac for nearly 4 minutes. He had watched the approach, the drawn weapon, the takedown, the cuffs. He had heard Darnell identify himself twice. He had heard the child screaming from the doorway, and he had watched Briggs ignore every word the man on the ground said. Fenton walked forward now, past Sutton's cruiser, past the basketball hoop part still spread across the driveway. He stopped at the mailbox at the edge of Darnell's front yard and looked at it. The name was printed clearly on the side in white adhesive letters. Carter. He looked at the man in the grass, then back at the mailbox. Then he walked to the front door where Sutton still stood blocking the child. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. Through the glass panel beside the door, he could see the hallway. Family photos lined the wall. A man in navy dress blues holding a small girl. The same man on the lawn. The same girl in the doorway. Fenton turned and walked back to Briggs. Uncuff him. Briggs looked up. What? His name is on the mailbox. His photos are on the wall. He lives here. Uncuff him. Briggs shook his head. We need to clear the house first. Could be a domestic situation. Could be anything. Fenton's voice dropped. It was no longer a suggestion. I'm a corporal. You're an officer. I'm telling you to take the cuffs off that man right now. Briggs stared at him for a long second, jaw clenched, then stood up and stepped back without reaching for the cuffs. Fenton knelt down beside Darnell. I'm going to remove these. Stay still. He unlocked the left cuff first, then the right. The metal had cut into the skin on both wrists. Blood smeared across Darnell's palms as he brought his hands forward. The moment the cuffs came off, Zoe broke past Sutton and ran across the lawn. She hit her father's chest before he could even sit up fully, her arms locking around his neck, her face buried against him, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Darnell held her with both hands and said nothing. He just held her. Fenton stood and spoke quietly. I'm sorry, sir. Behind them, Briggs turned toward his cruiser. His voice was low, but not low enough. This isn't over. Victor Langley's phone caught it from across the street, and the red light on Fenton's body camera had been blinking the entire time. Darnell sat on the front porch steps with Zoe in his lap. She had stopped screaming, but hadn't stopped shaking. Her fingers gripped his t-shirt so tight her knuckles were pale. He rested one hand on the back of her head and kept his breathing steady, the way he did when he needed the people around him to feel that the worst part was over. His wrists were still bleeding. He didn't wipe them. Corporal Fenton stepped inside the house with Darnell's permission and returned a minute later holding a military ID and a folded set of orders from the kitchen counter. He looked at the ID first. The photo matched. The name read Carter, Darnell A. The rank read Senior Chief Petty Officer. The branch read United States Navy. Below the ID in a leather folio were commendation letters, deployment records, and a summary of service that included Naval Special Warfare Group assignments spanning nearly 2 decades. Fenton's expression shifted as he read. He looked up at Darnell, sitting on the steps holding his daughter, wrists raw, grass stains on his shirt, and something tightened behind his eyes. He keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Corporal Fenton on scene at Maplewood Drive. The call is unfounded. Subject is the confirmed homeowner and an active-duty senior chief in the United States Navy. No violation, no crime. Repeat, no crime. There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet, copy. By the cruiser, Briggs leaned against the hood with his arms crossed. Sutton stood beside him, staring at the ground. Neither of them walked back toward the porch. Neither of them said a word. Karen Whitfield's front door closed softly. She had already gone inside. Victor Langley crossed the street and approached Darnell with his phone in hand. Sir, I recorded the whole thing, every second. You need this. Darnell looked at him. Thank you. Mr. Washington walked over slowly, Beverly beside him. His voice was low but firm. She's done this before. To us. To the family who looked at this house before you bought it. They were a young Latino couple. She called the police on them during the open house. They didn't make an offer. Darnell looked at the Whitfield house. The blinds were closed. Beverly Washington added quietly, Every black or brown person who steps foot on this street, she calls. Every single one. It's been years. Darnell said nothing. He just held Zoe tighter and looked at the blood drying on his wrists. Darnell carried Zoe inside and locked the front door. He sat her on the couch, turned on her favorite show, and told her he would be right back. She didn't want to let go of his arm. He knelt down and looked her in the eyes. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Nobody is taking me anywhere." She let go slowly. He went to the kitchen sink and ran cold water over his wrists. The cuts weren't deep, but they stung. Thin lines where the metal had bitten into the skin when Briggs cinched the cuffs past what was needed. He dried his hands, sat down at the kitchen table, and picked up his phone. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pace, didn't slam anything. He called his commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Command and reported what had happened in clear, precise language, the way he would report a mission debrief. The stop, the drawn weapon, the knee, the cuffs, the language, his daughter in the doorway. The CO listened without interrupting. When Darnell finished, the CO said 2 words: "Stand by." Within the hour, Naval Special Warfare Command Legal was notified and opened a file. NCIS received a formal referral and began a preliminary inquiry into the use of force against an active-duty Special Operations Service member on domestic soil. Darnell's CO made a second call, this one directly to the Lakewood Police Department's Chief of Police. The conversation was short. The tone was not friendly. Meanwhile, 6 miles away, Victor Langley sat in his living room and uploaded the video to 3 platforms. He didn't add commentary. He didn't need to. The footage showed everything. A black man on his knees with open hands, a weapon drawn, a knee driven into his back, cuffs snapped on while a 7-year-old screamed from the doorway, a woman standing at the edge of her yard with her arms crossed, watching, and one officer's voice, low but audible, saying, "People like you always have a story." By midnight, the video had been viewed over 500,000 times. By morning, it would pass 1 million. And the phones in offices that Briggs and Whitfield had never heard of were already starting to ring. The investigation moved fast. Internal Affairs pulled body camera footage from all 3 officers by Monday morning. Corporal Fenton's camera told the full story. It showed Darnell stepping forward with open hands. It showed Briggs drawing his weapon at 20 feet. It showed the takedown, the knee, the cuffs, the child screaming in the doorway. It captured Briggs' voice saying, "People like you always have a story." The audio was clean. The footage was unbroken. There was nothing to dispute. Officer Sutton's camera was partial. Her angle caught voices but missed the physical contact during the takedown. It showed her blocking the door but cut away before Zoe ran to her father. Useful, but incomplete. Officer Briggs' camera recorded nothing. According to his report, the device malfunctioned during the call. Internal Affairs noted this was the 3rd time in 2 years Briggs' camera had failed during a use-of-force incident. The 911 call audio was reviewed next. Karen Whitfield's words were clear on the recording. Suspicious black male, could be armed, child inside who might be in danger. None of it was true. The mention of a weapon and a child in danger had directly escalated the dispatch priority and shaped how Briggs approached the scene. The district attorney's office flagged the call as potentially criminal. By midweek, the DOJ Civil Rights Division had been contacted and assigned a team. The Pentagon issued a formal inquiry requesting all footage, dispatch records, and officer service files. NCIS expanded its review into a full investigation. Darnell retained a civil rights attorney named Adrienne Caldwell. She reviewed the evidence in one sitting and told him this case would not be quiet. Investigators pulled Karen Whitfield's full 911 history the same week. In 6 months, she had placed 8 calls connected to Darnell's property. A plumber's van, a friend waiting in a parked car, a Friday evening barbecue. 8 calls, 8 dispatches, 0 violations, 0 crimes. They went back further. Over 5 years, Karen had made 14 additional 911 calls involving black or brown individuals on or near Maplewood Drive. A black delivery driver reported as casing houses. A brown teenager on a bicycle reported as suspicious. A black real estate agent reported as an unknown male going door to door. Every call unsubstantiated. Every subject a person of color. Not once had she called about a white person on her street. HOA emails surfaced next. In one, Karen wrote that the board needed to think carefully about the kind of people purchasing in the community. In another, she referenced maintaining the standards that made this neighborhood desirable. She never used the word race. She never had to. A former neighbor contacted investigators after seeing the viral video. Luis and Maria Flores, a Latino couple who had lived on the street for 3 years, described constant police calls, HOA complaints about their yard and front door color, and anonymous notes on their car. One read, "You don't belong here." They moved because fighting was no longer worth it. Karen was interviewed in her living room. Gerald sat beside her in silence. She said she was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. When investigators asked her to name one specific crime she had ever seen Darnell Carter commit, she couldn't. The investigator closed his notebook. The record said everything she wouldn't. The outcomes came within 2 months. Officer Ryan Briggs was terminated on 5 counts. Excessive force, failure to de-escalate, failure to verify residency, racial bias indicators in his conduct, and suspicious body camera failure, the third such failure in 2 years, a pattern the department could no longer ignore. His law enforcement certification was revoked by the state board. He was barred from working in any policing capacity in the state. Officer Dana Sutton was suspended without pay and demoted for failure to intervene during a use of force she knew was unjustified. Before the disciplinary process concluded, she submitted her resignation. No statement, no apology. She was gone within a week. Corporal James Fenton received a formal commendation for his intervention on scene. In a private conversation with a fellow officer, he said it should have come sooner. "I watched too long." 2 supervisors who had previously dismissed complaints against Briggs were placed under internal review. One had signed off on the dismissal of all 4 prior excessive force complaints. The other had approved Briggs's return to active duty after each incident without requiring retraining. Both were suspended pending the outcome. The Lakewood Police Department entered into a federal consent decree requiring mandatory de-escalation training, independent body camera auditing, civilian oversight of use of force incidents, and quarterly reporting on racial disparities in police contact. Karen Whitfield was charged by the district attorney with filing a false police report and making a false emergency claim involving a weapon. Both were misdemeanors. Both carried potential jail time. But the charges didn't stop there. After reviewing her full 911 history, the pattern of calls targeting black and brown residents, and the HOA emails referencing the kind of people moving into the neighborhood, federal prosecutors added a charge of conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law. The trial lasted 4 days. Karen testified she was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. Prosecutors played the 911 audio. They presented the 22 unsubstantiated calls. They read her emails to the HOA. They called Luis Flores to the stand, who described the anonymous notes, the constant police visits, and the day his wife told him she didn't feel safe in her own home anymore. The jury convicted Karen on all counts. She was sentenced to 14 months in federal prison and 3 years of supervised release. The Maplewood Estates HOA was named as a co-defendant in the civil lawsuit for enabling and failing to address years of discriminatory conduct documented in their own email records. Darnell's civil rights lawsuit against the city, the officers, and Karen Whitfield was settled before trial. The amount was in the 7 figures. The settlement included mandated department reforms, the creation of an independent civilian oversight board, and a formal public apology issued by the city. Darnell didn't attend the press conference. He was at home with Zoe. The basketball hoop went up on a Sunday morning. Darnell tightened the last bolt, stepped back, and bounced the ball once on the driveway before passing it to Zoe. She caught it with both hands, lined up her shot the way he had taught her, and missed wide. She laughed. He rebounded it and passed it back. She shot again. This time, it hit the rim. That afternoon, James and Beverly Washington walked across the street carrying foil-covered dishes. Darnell had the grill going in the backyard. Zoe showed Beverly her new hoop. James handed Darnell a bottle of sauce and said, "Welcome to the street. For real this time." Karen Whitfield's house sat empty. A for sale sign stood in the front yard. The blinds were drawn. She would not be returning. Darnell didn't talk about her. He didn't talk about Briggs or Sutton or the cuffs or the lawn. Not to the neighbors, not to the press. He had said what he needed to say in his statements, in the courtroom, and in the evidence. That was enough. He used a portion of the settlement to establish a legal defense fund for victims of racially motivated false police reports. People who had been swatted, targeted, and terrorized by neighbors who weaponized 911 and knew exactly what they were doing. He partnered with Adrian Caldwell to build a network of attorneys willing to take those cases. A few weeks later, his commanding officer called. "Darnell, you handled it like a SEAL." Darnell looked through the kitchen window at Zoe shooting baskets in the driveway, the hoop he had been building the day they put him on the ground. "I handled it like her father." The final frame of the body camera footage would circulate for months. A decorated war hero, face down on his own front lawn, wrists cuffed behind his back, his 7-year-old daughter screaming 10 feet away. Underneath it, in every article, every training bulletin, every courtroom exhibit, the same words appeared. This is what unchecked bias looks like. No names were printed. They didn't need to be. The footage spoke for itself. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.
You expect me to believe you live here?
Yes, this is my house. My ID is in my back pocket.
Yeah? Funny how nobody around here knows you.
I just moved in this morning.
You don't just move in here, not without someone noticing.
My daughter is inside. She's
Then maybe you should have thought about that before trying.
At 11:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning in the gated community of Prescott Ridge, a white woman dialed 911 and reported a break-in in progress. She described the suspect as a black female, acting erratic, possibly armed, moving boxes out of a residence on Wyndham Lane. She used the phrase, "she doesn't belong here," twice during the call. Police arrived 7 minutes later with lights, sirens, and weapons drawn. The woman they surrounded on the front lawn was not a burglar. She was Judge Denise Ayanna Carter, newly appointed to the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina, confirmed by the Senate just 3 weeks earlier. She was carrying a box of her daughter's books. Her 10-year-old, Naomi, was watching from inside the house through the living room window. Within minutes, Denise was face down on her own freshly laid sod, wrists cuffed behind her back, a knee pressed into her spine, while her daughter screamed from behind the glass. The 911 caller watched from her porch with her arms crossed. She never flinched. What none of them knew yet, not the caller, not the officers, not the HOA president who had quietly made this neighborhood her personal checkpoint, was that within 72 hours, federal investigators would be pulling phone records, body cam footage, and HOA emails. Careers would be destroyed, criminal charges would be filed, and the woman they had just put on the ground would be sitting on the federal bench, presiding over the very type of case they had just created. Prescott Ridge sat 6 miles outside Charlotte, North Carolina, behind a stone wall and a wrought iron gate that opened only with a resident code or a guard's approval. The home started at $1.2 million. The lawns were edged weekly by contracted crews who were let in through the service entrance and expected to leave by 4 p.m. There was a clubhouse, a private pool, and a quarterly newsletter that featured recipes, landscaping tips, and reminders about community standards. On paper, it was one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the region. In practice, it had never had a black homeowner. Not once in 26 years. That wasn't an accident. It was a culture. The Homeowners Association, led by its long-serving president Karen Langford, 58, a retired real estate broker with a firm smile and a tighter grip on the neighborhood than any board member before her, had spent years building an invisible fence far more effective than the iron one at the entrance. Under her leadership, police had been called to Prescott Ridge 14 times in the past 3 years for suspicious individuals. Every single one involved a person of color. A black landscaper was questioned for 25 minutes while his white employer watched from her porch without saying a word. A Latino delivery driver was followed by a resident in an SUV from the gate to his stop and back again. A black real estate agent showing a listing to a qualified buyer was held at the gate for 40 minutes while Karen personally called the listing office to verify authorization. None of these incidents were ever formally reported. None were challenged. No one filed a complaint because no one in Prescott Ridge saw a problem. That was the neighborhood Judge Denise Ayanna Carter had just moved into, and it was the neighborhood that was about to learn what happens when the person you try to push out has the full weight of the federal government behind her. Denise Ayanna Carter was not born into the world that Prescott Ridge represented. She grew up in Sandtown, Winchester, one of Baltimore's poorest neighborhoods, in a 2-bedroom apartment with her mother Gloria and 2 younger siblings. Gloria worked double shifts as a hospital custodian and still couldn't always make rent. There were nights the power went out. There were weeks groceries ran thin. But Gloria Carter had one rule that never bent. You will study. You will read. You will become something they can't take from you. Denise listened. She graduated valedictorian from a public high school with a crumbling gymnasium and no AP courses. A full scholarship took her to Spelman College. Another took her to Howard University's School of Law, where she graduated top of her class. She clerked for a federal appellate judge on the Fourth Circuit, then joined the Department of Justice as a civil rights prosecutor. For 12 years, she built cases against police departments that profiled, brutalized, and discriminated. She prosecuted officers who used badges as weapons. She sued housing authorities that redlined black families out of neighborhoods exactly like Prescott Ridge. She knew the law. She knew the patterns. She knew how power worked when no one was watching. When the president nominated her to the federal bench, she became one of the youngest black women ever appointed to a U.S. District Court. The Senate confirmed her, 58-42. She purchased the house on Wyndham Lane because she wanted her daughter, Naomi, to grow up somewhere safe, with good schools and open space. That Saturday morning, wearing jeans and a Howard University sweatshirt, she carried boxes from a moving truck into her new home. She had no idea her neighbor was already watching. Karen Langford had seen the moving truck pull onto Wyndham Lane at 9:15 a.m. She noticed it from her kitchen window while pouring her second cup of coffee. When a black woman stepped out of the cab and began unloading boxes, Karen set the cup down and didn't pick it up again. She watched for 20 minutes. She studied the woman's movements, the way she walked back and forth between the truck and the front door, the way she paused on the porch and looked around. To anyone else, it was a person moving into a new home. To Karen, it was a threat. She picked up her phone and called Linda Greaves, 2 houses down. Did you know someone was moving into the Wyndham house? Linda didn't. Karen called Paul Fenton across the street. Same answer. No one had heard. No one had been told. In Karen's mind, that absence of information was confirmation enough. She had told 3 different neighbors over the past month that she hoped the Wyndham property would go to the right kind of family. She never defined what that meant. She never had to. At 11:38 a.m., Karen dialed 911. The transcript would later be entered into federal evidence. There's a black woman at 4912 Wyndham Lane. She's going in and out of the house. I don't think she lives here. She's acting erratic, looking around like she's casing the place. I think she might be armed. I saw something in her waistband. She doesn't belong here. The object in Denise's waistband was a tape measure she had tucked there while measuring the front door frame for a new screen door. Karen used the phrase, "she doesn't belong here," twice during the call. The dispatcher classified it as a burglary in progress with a possibly armed suspect. 2 patrol units were sent, lights and sirens. Officer Wade Prescott was 43 years old with 18 years on the force and a personnel file thick enough to warrant its own drawer. 7 complaints of excessive force, 3 allegations of racially biased stops, all dismissed, all buried under internal review processes that treated civilian complaints like paperwork to be filed, not problems to be solved. Prescott had never been suspended, never been reprimanded in writing, never faced a single consequence for any of it. He had learned over nearly 2 decades that complaints disappeared and badges didn't. His partner that morning was Officer Danny Lucero, 29, 4 years on the job. Lucero was quiet, agreeable, and had never once questioned a senior officer's judgment on a call. He followed. That was his role, and he had never been given a reason to reconsider it. When the dispatch came through at 11:45 a.m., the call was coded as a burglary in progress, possibly armed suspect, residential neighborhood. Prescott pulled the cruiser out of a gas station lot and hit the lights. Lucero checked his sidearm. Neither officer ran the address through property records. Neither checked the county assessor database, which would have shown the home had been purchased 3 weeks earlier by Denise A. Carter. They didn't look at the mailbox when they arrived, which already bore her name in neat black letters. They pulled the cruiser directly onto the front lawn, tires cutting into fresh sod, and exited with weapons drawn. Denise was standing on the front porch holding a cardboard box labeled Naomi's Books in black marker. She looked up and saw 2 officers pointing service weapons at her chest. Behind her, through the living room window, her 10-year-old daughter Naomi stood frozen, watching her mother stare down the barrels of 2 guns. Prescott shouted first, "Drop it! Hands where I can see them! Get off the porch! Now!" Denise set the box down slowly, her hands rising to shoulder height, palms open and facing forward. She kept her voice even. "Officers, my name is Judge Denise Carter. This is my home. I just moved in today. I can show you my identification." Prescott didn't pause. "Sure you are. And I'm the mayor. Step off the porch and get on the ground. Now." Denise stayed calm. "Sir, I am a federal judge with the United States District Court. My ID is in my back pocket. My daughter is inside. She's 10 years old. Please don't scare her." Prescott stepped closer, his weapon still raised. "I'm not going to ask again. On the ground." Lucero circled to her left, positioning himself behind her, cutting off any path back toward the front door. Denise lowered herself to one knee slowly, still speaking. "I'm complying. I'm not resisting. Please, my daughter is watching." Prescott holstered his weapon, grabbed her right wrist, twisted it behind her back, and drove her face first into the lawn. The impact was hard enough to press grass and dirt into the side of her face. He wrenched her other arm back and snapped the cuffs on while planting a knee between her shoulder blades. Inside the house, Naomi screamed. The sound cut through the morning air and reached every porch on the street. Neighbors stepped outside. At least 4 phones began recording. Karen Langford stood on her own porch 15 yards away, arms crossed, watching. She nodded once. Denise spoke into the grass. "My daughter is inside, alone. She's 10. Please don't frighten her. Please." Prescott didn't respond. Lucero, without a warrant, without permission, without probable cause, walked to the front door, pushed it open, and entered the home with his weapon drawn. He found Naomi crouched behind the couch, sobbing, her arms wrapped around her knees. He shouted commands at her. "Don't move. Where's anyone else? How many people are in this house?" She was 10 years old. She could barely breathe through the crying. Lucero radioed in. "Minor on the premises. No other suspects." He left her there, alone. He walked back outside to stand over Denise, while Naomi's cries echoed through the open front door for every camera and every neighbor to hear. Naomi Carter had been coloring at the kitchen table when the moving truck arrived that morning. She had helped carry 2 small boxes from the truck to her new bedroom, the one with the big window that looked out onto the backyard. Her mother had promised they would hang curtains together that afternoon. Purple ones. Naomi had picked them out herself. When the sirens hit the street, Naomi moved to the living room window. She saw the police car pull onto the grass. She saw 2 officers get out with their guns pointed at her mother. She didn't understand. Her mother was just standing on the porch holding a box. The box with Naomi's name on it. The one with her books inside. She pressed her hands against the glass. Her breath fogged the window. She couldn't move. She watched Prescott grab her mother's arm and twist it. She watched her mother go down face first into the lawn. She watched a knee press into her mother's back. That was when Naomi screamed. It was the kind of scream that doesn't stop on its own, the kind that comes from a place deeper than fear. Neighbors heard it from their porches. Cell phone recordings captured it clearly, a child's voice breaking over and over, calling for her mother. Then the front door burst open. Lucero came through it with his weapon drawn, even though the door had been unlocked the entire time. He swept the room. He found Naomi behind the couch, curled into herself, arms around her knees, face wet with tears. He pointed his weapon in her direction before lowering it. "Don't move. How many people are in this house?" She couldn't answer. She was gasping between sobs. "Mommy, I want my mommy, please." Lucero didn't kneel, didn't soften his voice, didn't explain why he was there or that her mother was okay. He keyed his radio. "Minor on premises. No other suspects found." Then he turned and walked back outside, pulling the door shut behind him. Naomi stayed behind the couch for 15 minutes, alone, in a house she had lived in for less than 3 hours. She could hear voices outside, but not her mother's. She didn't know if her mother was hurt. She didn't know if her mother was coming back. The neighbor videos captured what the body cameras missed: the sound of a child crying through an open window, calling for a mother who was face down in handcuffs 12 feet away and not allowed to answer. Gerald Forsyth had moved to Prescott Ridge 8 years earlier after retiring from a 40-year career in civil litigation. He was 72, white-haired, and had spent most of his adult life in courtrooms. He knew what lawful procedure looked like, and he knew what he was watching from his porch was not it. He had introduced himself to Denise that morning when the moving truck arrived. They had talked for a few minutes. She mentioned she was a judge. He had helped carry a box to the porch. When the officers arrived and put her on the ground, Forsyth didn't hesitate. He walked across the lawn, steady and deliberate, and stopped 6 feet from where Prescott stood over Denise. "Officers, you are making a serious mistake." Prescott barely looked at him. "Sir, step back. This is a police matter." Forsyth didn't move. "This woman is the homeowner. Her name is on the mailbox. Her deed is inside. I have her identification right here." He held up Denise's wallet and a manila folder with the closing documents she had asked him to grab from the kitchen counter. Prescott glanced at the wallet, then back at Forsyth. "We'll handle verification. Step back." Forsyth's voice hardened. "I've known this woman for 2 hours, and I already pulled up her Senate confirmation on my phone." He held the screen up, showing a news article with Denise's photograph in the headline. "She was confirmed by the United States Senate 3 weeks ago. You are handcuffing a sitting federal judge on her own property." Prescott's jaw went slack for half a second. His eyes moved from the phone screen to Denise's face, still pressed against the grass. The photo matched. The name matched. Lucero, standing behind them, went pale. His hand dropped from his belt. For the first time since they had pulled onto the lawn, neither officer moved. Neither spoke. Forsyth lowered the phone. "I suggest you uncuff her immediately and call your supervisor before this gets worse than it already is." Prescott did not uncuff her. He did not apologize. He did not check her ID. Instead, he reached for his radio and keyed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. I need a sergeant at 4912 Wyndham Lane. Possible misidentification. Requesting guidance." Denise lay still in the grass, wrists locked behind her back, listening to the man who had just slammed her to the ground ask someone else what to do next. Sergeant Rita Bowman pulled up to 4912 Wyndham Lane 6 minutes after Prescott's radio call. She was 48, a 22-year veteran of the department, and the kind of supervisor who didn't need to raise her voice to make a room go quiet. She stepped out of her cruiser, scanned the scene, and understood immediately that something had gone very wrong. A black woman in handcuffs on a freshly sodded lawn, a moving truck in the driveway, neighbors with phones out, a child's muffled crying from inside the house. Gerald Forsythe met her halfway across the lawn, holding the wallet and the deed folder. He handed her both without a word. Bowman looked at the driver's license first, then the deed, then the news article still open on Forsythe's phone. She looked at Denise on the ground and back at Prescott. "Uncuff her, now." Prescott hesitated. "Sarge, the call said she was possibly armed." "I said uncuff her." Prescott removed the handcuffs. Denise sat up slowly, rubbing the red grooves pressed into her wrists, grass and dirt still on the side of her face. Bowman crouched in front of her. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Rita Bowman. I'm sorry, are you hurt?" "My daughter," Denise said. "She's inside, alone. She's been alone this whole time." Bowman stood, walked to the front door, and went inside. She found Naomi still behind the couch, knees pulled to her chest, face swollen from crying. Bowman sat on the floor beside her. "Your mom is okay. She's right outside. She's coming in to get you, I promise." She stayed with Naomi until Denise walked through the door 2 minutes later. Then Bowman went back outside and turned on Prescott. "What probable cause did you have? He got a burglary call. Did you verify ownership before drawing weapons? Did you check the mailbox? The moving truck has her name on the invoice taped to the door." Prescott said nothing. Bowman pulled both officers' radios and body cameras. She called the precinct captain from the driveway. The captain called the chief. The chief called the city attorney. Within the hour, the Charlotte FBI field office received a formal notification. An assault on a sitting federal judge is a federal crime. And when the DOJ Civil Rights Division opened a file that afternoon, the name on the intake form was familiar to half the office. Denise had worked there for 12 years. Federal investigators pulled the 911 recording within 24 hours. They played it back 4 times in a conference room at the Charlotte FBI field office. Every word was transcribed, time-stamped, and entered into evidence. "There's a black woman at 4912 Wyndham Lane. She's going in and out of the house. I don't think she lives here. She's acting erratic, looking around like she's casing the place. I think she might be armed. I saw something in her waistband. She doesn't belong here." Each claim was checked against the facts. Erratic behavior. Denise had been walking boxes from a moving truck to her front door in a straight line for over an hour. Possibly armed. The object in her waistband was a tape measure, visible in both body camera footage and neighbor recordings. Casing the place. She had been measuring her own door frame. She doesn't belong here. She said it twice. Investigators then pulled Karen Langford's history with the department. What they found was not a concerned citizen making a one-time mistake. It was a pattern. 14 calls to police in 3 years. Every single one about a non-white person in the neighborhood. A black landscaper working a scheduled job. A Latino FedEx driver making a delivery. A biracial couple touring a house for sale. All unfounded. All logged. All ignored. Then the HOA email surfaced. Karen had used her position as president to coordinate what investigators would later describe as a neighborhood surveillance network targeting people of color. One email to the board read plainly, "We need to protect the character of this community before it changes." Another instructed residents to report anyone who doesn't look like they live here and let the police sort it out. Federal prosecutors determined that Karen's 911 call was not a misunderstanding. It was a fabrication. A false police report designed to provoke an armed response against an unarmed black woman on her own property. Given the documented pattern of racial targeting, the U.S. Attorney's Office added a federal hate crime charge under 18 U.S.C. Section 249. Karen Langford was arrested on a Tuesday morning, walked out of the same gated entrance she had guarded so carefully, and placed in the back of a federal vehicle. Her HOA presidency was stripped that same week by an emergency board vote. Within a month, her husband filed for divorce, citing in the petition irreconcilable differences rooted in moral disagreement. Karen's attorney released a statement calling the charges an overreach. The 911 recording said otherwise. Internal Affairs opened its investigation before the sun set on Saturday. The body camera footage from both officers was pulled, time-stamped, and logged into the department's evidence system by 4 p.m. A secure copy was sent to the FBI field office by 5. The footage from Prescott's camera began in the cruiser. He and Lucero were driving to the call, lights on, sirens wailing. Prescott glanced at Lucero and grinned. "Bet you $20 it's a crackhead." Lucero laughed. The camera caught it all. The audio was clean. The timestamp was clear. When they arrived, the footage showed Prescott pulling onto the lawn without pausing at the mailbox. It showed him exiting with his weapon drawn before assessing the scene. It showed Denise standing calmly on the porch holding a cardboard box. It captured her voice, steady and clear. "Officers, my name is Judge Denise Carter. This is my home." And it captured Prescott's response. "Sure you are. And I'm the mayor." The footage continued through the takedown, Denise lowering herself voluntarily, Prescott grabbing her wrist, the twist, the shove. Her face hitting the grass, his knee on her back, her voice underneath him. "My daughter is inside. She's 10. Please don't scare her." At no point did Prescott attempt to verify her identity. At no point did he run the address. At no point did he check the deed, the mailbox, or the moving invoice taped to the front door with her full name on it. Lucero's footage confirmed the unlawful entry. No warrant, no exigent circumstances beyond his own assumption. A weapon drawn inside a home where the only occupant was a 10-year-old girl behind a couch? Internal Affairs completed its preliminary findings within 5 days. Prescott was terminated for excessive force, racial bias, failure to follow verification procedures, and conduct unbecoming an officer. His 7 prior complaints were formally reopened. Lucero was terminated for failure to intervene, unlawful entry without a warrant, and traumatizing a minor during an unjustified search. The State Law Enforcement Certification Board opened emergency decertification proceedings against both officers within the week. Neither would ever carry a badge again. Federal prosecutors convened a grand jury to weigh criminal charges: assault on a federal official, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, conspiracy. The evidence was already in hand. Their own cameras had provided it. The neighbor videos hit the internet by Saturday evening. By Sunday morning, they had been viewed over 2 million times. The image that spread fastest was a still frame pulled from Gerald Forsyth's phone. It showed Denise Carter face down on her own lawn, wrists cuffed behind her back, a white officer's knee between her shoulder blades, while a cardboard box labeled Naomi's Books lay on its side 2 feet away. The caption someone added before sharing read simply, "She's a federal judge. This is her house." That image became the front page of 4 national newspapers by Monday. Cable news ran the story on every cycle. The phrase, "She doesn't belong here," trended for 3 consecutive days. Charlotte erupted. Protests formed outside the police precinct within 48 hours. Not riots, not chaos. Organized groups of citizens holding signs and standing in silence. Teachers, attorneys, doctors, parents with their children. They didn't chant. They held printed screenshots of the body camera footage and the 911 transcript. That silence was louder than any slogan. The mayor held a press conference Monday afternoon. He called the incident deeply troubling and promised a full and transparent review. Civil rights organizations rejected the language immediately. Deeply troubling was what politicians said when they wanted to sound concerned without committing to action. They demanded structural reform, independent oversight, a complete audit of every police call made to Prescott Ridge in the past decade. Investigative reporters delivered that audit before the city could. They pulled public records and discovered that Prescott Ridge had generated 47 police calls about suspicious people of color in 5 years. Every single one was unfounded. Not a single arrest, not a single crime confirmed. 47 calls. 47 people stopped, questioned, followed, or confronted for the crime of being non-white in a wealthy neighborhood. The police chief was asked during a live interview whether he had been aware of the pattern. He hesitated for 4 seconds before answering. That pause was clipped and reshared more than the interview itself. By Wednesday, 3 city council members had publicly called for his resignation. The city attorney's office began preparing for a lawsuit it knew was coming and knew it could not win. The evidence was already public. The body cameras had made sure of that. Judge Denise Ayanna Carter recused herself from any proceeding connected to the incident before filing the lawsuit. She would not sit in judgment of her own case. She would let the system she had spent her career building do its work. Her attorneys filed the complaint in the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina on a Thursday morning. The defendant list was long. The City of Charlotte. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Officer Wade Prescott. Officer Danny Lucero. Karen Langford. The Prescott Ridge Homeowners Association. The allegations filled 64 pages. Unlawful arrest, excessive force, racial profiling, Fourth Amendment violations, assault on a federal official, unlawful entry of a private residence without a warrant, intentional infliction of emotional distress on a minor, conspiracy to deprive civil rights under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, failure to train, supervise, and discipline officers with documented histories of misconduct. The section on Naomi ran 11 pages. Her therapist, Dr. Renee Whitmore, submitted a sworn declaration describing the damage. Naomi had developed recurring nightmares in which officers broke down her door. She refused to be in any room alone. She flinched at sirens. She asked her mother every morning before school whether police would come to their house again. Dr. Whitmore described it as acute trauma consistent with a child who had been made to believe her parent was being taken from her by force. She was 10 years old. The lawsuit also included a class action component. 47 people of color had been wrongfully targeted by police calls originating from Prescott Ridge over the past 5 years. Each had been stopped, questioned, detained, or forced to leave based on nothing but their appearance. Their names were added to the complaint. Their experiences were documented. They were no longer isolated incidents. They were a pattern. Discovery broke the case open further. Internal police emails showed that supervisors had been aware of the volume of calls from Prescott Ridge for years. One captain had written to a lieutenant 18 months earlier. "We're getting a lot of calls from that gated community. Same type every time. Unfounded." The lieutenant's response was 3 words: respond and document. No investigation was opened. No pattern analysis was conducted. No one asked why every single call involved a person of color. The city's legal team reviewed the body camera footage, the 911 recording, the emails, the class action filings, and the therapist's declaration. Their recommendation to the city council was unanimous and immediate. Settle. Do not take this to trial. You will not win. The settlement was reached 5 months after the lawsuit was filed. The Carter family received $1.8 million in damages. The 47 class action plaintiffs shared an additional $600,000 compensation fund, with individual amounts determined by the severity of each incident. But the money was not the center of the agreement. The mandated reforms were. The city agreed to establish an independent civilian oversight board with full investigative authority over police misconduct complaints. Mandatory verification protocols were implemented for all property-related calls, requiring officers to confirm ownership records, check identification, and make visual assessments before any use of force. Quarterly demographic audits of all police interactions would be conducted and published publicly. The entire department would undergo retraining in implicit bias, de-escalation, and constitutional rights. Body camera compliance would be enforced with a zero-tolerance policy. Any officer who failed to activate their camera during a citizen interaction would face immediate suspension. The criminal cases moved on a parallel track. A federal grand jury indicted Wade Prescott on 2 counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, and assault on a federal official. The body camera footage was the prosecution's primary exhibit. his own voice, his own hands, his own knee. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on both counts. The judge sentenced Prescott to 4 years in federal prison. She noted in her remarks that his record of prior complaints demonstrated a pattern the department had chosen to ignore, and that this failure had culminated in the assault of a sitting federal judge on her own property in front of her child. Danny Lucero was convicted of deprivation of rights and unlawful entry. He received 18 months. His attorney argued he had simply followed a senior officer's lead. The judge was unmoved. Following orders is not a defense when the orders are unconstitutional. Karen Langford pleaded guilty to filing a false police report and 1 count of a federal hate crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 249. Her 911 call, her history of targeting, and the HOA emails left no room for a viable defense. She was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. She became the first person in North Carolina convicted under federal hate crime statutes for a weaponized 911 call. Legal analysts called it a landmark. The precedent was set. A phone call made with the intent to provoke an armed police response against a person based on their race was not a misunderstanding. It was a crime. 1 month after the settlement, Judge Denise Ayanna Carter walked into the Charles R. Jonas Federal Building in Charlotte, wearing her judicial robes for the first time. Naomi held her hand. A U.S. Marshal opened the door to her chambers. On her desk sat a drawing Naomi had made during therapy. 2 figures holding hands in front of a house with purple curtains. Denise placed it next to her nameplate and sat down. Her first case that week was a housing discrimination complaint. A black family alleged they had been systematically excluded from a rental property based on race. Denise ruled with a precision her colleagues described as measured but unmistakable. She never referenced her own experience from the bench. She didn't need to. Naomi was still seeing Dr. Whitmore twice a week. The nightmares came less often now. She had made a friend on the street, a girl named Lily, whose family had moved in after the case made national news. They rode bikes in the cul-de-sac where the cruiser had torn up the lawn. New sod covered the tire marks. Karen Langford's house sat empty, a for sale sign in the yard, curtains drawn, no offers. The HOA was dissolved and reformed under new bylaws prohibiting discriminatory reporting. A bronze plaque was installed at the neighborhood entrance. This community welcomes all residents equally. Denise used part of the settlement to establish the Carter Justice Initiative, a nonprofit providing free legal representation to victims of racially motivated false police reports. In its first year, the foundation took on 23 cases across 3 states. She never spoke publicly about what happened on her lawn. When a reporter asked off the record how she felt, she said only this: "I didn't need them to believe I was a judge. I needed them to treat me like a citizen." That should have been enough. They tried to tell her she didn't belong. She belonged more than any of them knew. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.
I'm telling you, that
This
man
ain't
keeps
normal.
coming around here. He's texting my daughter, taking her places. This ain't
Ma'am,
normal.
slow down. Right now, all I've got is a noise complaint and a car that already
Dude,
left.
she's 15. He's been buying her
Throwing
phones,
around
picking her up
serious
after that
accusations.
program.
At 6:47 p.m. on a Wednesday evening in Ocala, Florida, Officer Cedric Tate pulled his patrol car into the cracked parking lot of Pinewood Gardens, a low-income apartment complex on the city's southeast side. The dispatch had come in as a domestic disturbance, noise complaint, possible altercation. Cedric had handled dozens of calls at Pinewood before. Most ended with paperwork and nothing more. He stepped out, adjusted his vest, and activated his body cam. The red light blinked once and held steady. What he saw wasn't a fight. A teenage girl sat on the front steps of a ground floor unit, knees pulled to her chest, face buried in her arms. She was 15 years old. Her name was Kayla Simmons. Her mother, Rochelle Simmons, stood barefoot on the sidewalk, shouting at the taillights of a dark sedan pulling out of the lot. The car turned the corner and disappeared. Rochelle spun toward Cedric before he could speak. Her voice was raw. "That man has been coming around my daughter. He's been taking her places, buying her things, texting her at night." Cedric looked at Kayla. She didn't lift her head. Ma'am, who are you referring to? Rochelle's jaw tightened. He's a cop. He works for your department. He runs some program with kids. That's how he found her. Cedric felt the shift in the air before his mind fully caught up. He looked at Kayla again. She still hadn't moved. The body cam on his chest kept recording, and somewhere behind the red blinking light, a chain of events had already begun that would reach far beyond this parking lot, far beyond this department, and into rooms where men in suits would eventually decide who kept their freedom and who lost it. Rochelle said the name without hesitation. Vincent Hargrove. Sergeant Vincent Hargrove. Cedric's stomach dropped. He knew exactly who that was. Every officer in the Ocala Police Department did. Hargrove was a 22-year veteran, white, broad-shouldered, with a handshake that lingered too long and a smile that showed up in every department newsletter and city press release. He ran the Youth Outreach Program, the one the mayor had praised at 3 consecutive budget hearings. He coached a community basketball league. He had a wall of commendation plaques in his office and a Rolodex of connections that stretched from City Hall to the state attorney's office. He was untouchable. And Rochelle Simmons had just accused him of grooming her 15-year-old daughter. Cedric crouched near the steps. Kayla, can you tell me what happened? Kayla didn't answer right away. Her fingers picked at the skin around her nails. Rochelle touched her shoulder. Tell him, baby. It came out slowly, quietly. The body cam caught every word. He started giving me rides home from the program. Then he started texting me. Then he bought me a phone. He said I was special. He said I couldn't tell anyone because they wouldn't understand. Her voice cracked. Then he started touching me. Cedric stayed still. His training told him to keep the questions open. His instincts told him something else entirely. He knew what filing this report would mean. He knew whose name would be on it. And he knew that the moment that name entered the system, his own life inside the department would change in ways he couldn't take back. But the body cam was rolling, and a 15-year-old girl had just told him the truth. So he wrote it down. The next morning, Cedric walked into Lieutenant Craig Dunmore's office at 8:15 a.m. with the report printed, signed, and paperclipped to a copy of his body cam log. Dunmore was 51, white, a career administrator who had spent more years behind a desk than on the street. He had a reputation for keeping things smooth, not for keeping things right. Cedric placed the report on the desk. Dunmore read it slowly. You need to be very careful with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. You need to be very careful with accusations like this. This girl, she's 15. Kids that age get confused. They exaggerate. Sometimes they flat out lie for attention. That doesn't change what she told me on camera, Cedric said. Dunmore's eyes narrowed slightly. You recorded it? It's on my body cam, standard activation. Dunmore exhaled through his nose, looked at the report again, looked at the name. Vincent Hargrove. He folded his hands. I'm going to give you some advice, officer. Not as your lieutenant, but as someone who's been here a long time. Don't go down this road. That girl's story hasn't been verified. Hargrove is a decorated sergeant with 2 decades of service. You start throwing his name around in a report like this, you're going to create problems you don't want. Cedric held his gaze. I'm not throwing anything around. I responded to a call. I documented what the victim told me. That's my job. Dunmore stared at him for a long moment. Then he picked up the report, placed it in a drawer, and closed it. I'll look into it. That's all for now. Cedric stood. He knew exactly what I'll look into it meant. It meant the drawer would stay closed, the report would go nowhere, and a 15-year-old girl would keep waiting for someone to believe her. The changes started within a week. Small at first, almost invisible. Cedric's regular day shift was reassigned without explanation. He was moved to the overnight rotation, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., covering the highest crime corridor in Ocala's southeast grid. When he asked a sergeant about it, the answer was short. Staffing needs. His locker, which had been in the main row near the briefing room for 4 years, was relocated to the far corner of the basement level. No reason given, no memo. Entered the break room. A patrol partner entered the break room. A patrol partner he'd ridden with for 2 years requested a reassignment without telling him. Cedric heard about it from someone else. Then came the union visit. A rep named Dale Prescott, a thick-necked white man with a shaved head and a permanent half-smile, cornered Cedric near the vending machines one night before shift. "Just a friendly word," Prescott said, leaning against the wall. "People are talking, Tate. You filed something that's making waves. I'd think real hard about your future here if I were you." Cedric looked at him. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm advising you. There's a difference." Prescott walked away. Cedric stood there, alone, the fluorescent lights buzzing above him. And while all of this was happening, while the department quietly rearranged itself to push Cedric into a corner, Sergeant Vincent Hargrove continued his routine without interruption. He showed up to community basketball games. He posed for photos at a school assembly. He shook hands at a city council event where the mayor publicly thanked him for his dedication to Ocala's youth. His smile was wide, his uniform was pressed, and no one around him had any idea what was coming. 3 weeks after Cedric filed his report, Kayla Simmons stopped going to school. Her attendance, which had already been slipping, collapsed entirely. She wouldn't eat breakfast. She wouldn't leave her room. Rochelle found her one night sitting on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., staring at the wall, holding her phone. When Rochelle took the phone and scrolled through the messages, her hands started shaking. There were texts from an unsaved number. The language was careful at first, then possessive, then explicit. Phrases no adult should ever send to a child. Instructions. Threats disguised as affection. You know what happens if you talk. I'm the only one who cares about you. Don't ruin this. Rochelle screenshotted everything. Then she called Cedric directly. She had kept his card from the night of the first visit. He answered on the second ring. "Officer Tate, I've been calling the department for 2 weeks. Nobody's called me back. Nobody's come to talk to Kayla. Nobody's done anything." Cedric closed his eyes. He already knew. "I filed the report, Ms. Simmons. I put it in my lieutenant's hands." She was crying now. "Then why hasn't anyone come? Why is this man still out there? He's still texting her. He's still reaching her somehow." Cedric asked her to preserve the phone exactly as it was. Don't delete anything. Don't reply. Keep it somewhere safe. That night, after his shift, Cedric sat in his car in the department parking lot and pulled up his Bodycam log on the internal system. His footage from that Wednesday evening at Pinewood Gardens was still there. The report he had filed was listed as under review. It had not been assigned to a detective. No case number had been generated. No follow-up was logged. 3 weeks. A child had disclosed abuse on camera, and the system had done nothing. Cedric downloaded the footage to a personal drive. He copied the report. He saved the incident log. He stored all of it in a lockbox at his apartment. If the department was going to bury this, they were going to have to bury it without the evidence. Cedric didn't go looking for the second victim. She found him through a woman named Loretta Fay. Loretta ran a small nonprofit on the west side of Ocala called Bridge Forward, a mentorship and tutoring program for at-risk girls between the ages of 12 and 17. She had worked with the police department's youth outreach before, but had quietly pulled away 2 years earlier. She never said why publicly, but when Cedric reached out to her through a mutual contact at a community church, she agreed to meet him at a coffee shop off Silver Springs Boulevard. She was cautious. She didn't want her name in any report, but she had something to say. "You're not the first person to notice something wrong with Hargrove." Cedric set his cup down. "What do you mean?" 2 years ago, a girl in my program, 14 years old, told her mother that Hargrove had been taking her on drives after sessions, buying her clothes. The mother filed a complaint with Internal Affairs. Loretta paused. They told her the investigation found no evidence. Then they told her if she kept pressing it, they'd refer her daughter for making a false statement. The family moved to Georgia the next month. The girl's name was Amira Odom. Cedric wrote it down. That night, he searched for Amira's mother through public records. He found a phone number in Savannah. He called. A woman answered. When Cedric explained who he was and why he was calling, the line went quiet for a long time. Then she started crying. Nobody believed us. They said my daughter was lying. They said she'd be the one in trouble. We left because we were afraid. Cedric told her she wasn't alone anymore. He told her that another girl had come forward, and that this time, someone was listening. He didn't tell her that the someone was just one officer with a copied Bodycam file and no backup from the department that employed him. He didn't tell her that he was running out of people to trust. He just told her the truth would come out, and for the first time since he had filed that report, he felt the weight of a promise he wasn't entirely sure he could keep. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Cedric was told to report to the administrative wing at 10 a.m. No explanation, no context, just a time and a room number. When he arrived, Lieutenant Craig Dunmore was seated at one end of a long table. Beside him sat Captain Frank Sorrento, the precinct commander, a man Cedric had spoken to maybe 3 times in 6 years. Sorrento was 56, white, with a military haircut and a face that never seemed to move. He had run the precinct for 9 years and had a reputation for loyalty, not to the law, but to the department's image. Sit down, Tate. Cedric sat. Sorrento opened a manila folder. Officer Tate, we've received a complaint from the evidence unit regarding your handling of materials in a narcotics case from last quarter. There are discrepancies in the chain of custody that need to be addressed. Cedric's jaw tightened. He had never mishandled anything in his career. His record was clean. What discrepancies? We'll get into that, Sorrento said. For now, you're being placed on administrative desk duty pending an internal review. We'll also need your body cam returned for recalibration. Cedric looked at Dunmore. Dunmore didn't look back. This is about the report I filed, Cedric said. Sorrento's expression didn't change. This is about evidence handling, nothing more. Cedric stood slowly. He unclipped his body cam from his vest and placed it on the table. But he didn't panic, because 2 weeks earlier, sitting in his apartment at 1 a.m. with the blinds drawn, he had copied every file that mattered. The footage, the report, the incident log, the screenshots Rochelle had sent him of Kayla's messages. All of it was in a lockbox that no one in the department knew existed. That afternoon, Cedric made a phone call he had been hoping he would never need to make. Nadira Qureshi answered on the third ring. She was a civil rights attorney based in Jacksonville, sharp, relentless, and known across Florida for taking cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. Cedric told her everything. When he finished, the line was quiet for a moment. Then Nadira said 3 words that changed the trajectory of everything. We go federal. 2 days later, Cedric sat in a windowless conference room on the 4th floor of the FBI field office in Jacksonville. Across from him were 2 agents from the Public Corruption Unit, Special Agent Rena Castillo and Special Agent Tom Brierly. Nadira sat beside him, a legal pad already half full of notes. Cedric laid it all out. The call at Pinewood Gardens, Kayla's disclosure on his body cam, the report he filed with Dunmore, the silence that followed, Rochelle's calls to the department that were never returned, the messages on Kayla's phone, the second victim, Amira Odom, whose family had been pressured into retracting their complaint and fleeing the state, the sudden reassignment to overnight shifts, the locker move, the union warning, and finally, the fabricated internal investigation designed to strip him of his body cam and push him out. Castillo listened without interrupting. When Cedric finished, she asked one question. Do you have the footage? Yes, Cedric said. Every second of it. He handed over the drive. Castillo inserted it into a secure laptop. The room went silent as Kayla's voice filled the speakers. Small, shaking, 15 years old, describing things no child should ever have to describe. When the playback ended, Brierly looked at Castillo. She nodded once. Within 48 hours, the FBI opened a formal federal investigation into Sergeant Vincent Hargrove and the Ocala Police Department. Agents began pulling Hargrove's phone records, financial statements, and department communications under sealed warrants. What they found went further than even Cedric had feared. Hargrove had been in contact with at least 5 minors outside any official program capacity. Late-night calls, prepaid phones, cash withdrawals of $200 and $300 at a time, all coinciding with dates the outreach program held evening sessions. The pattern was methodical, practiced, and it had been going on for years. Cedric drove back to Ocala that evening in silence. His hands gripped the wheel. The streetlights blurred past. He had done what the department refused to do. He had taken it outside the walls. And now, for the first time since that Wednesday night at Pinewood Gardens, he felt something shift beneath the surface. Not relief, not safety, but the slow turning of a machine far bigger and far more unforgiving than the one that had tried to silence him. The retaliation accelerated. Internal Affairs formally charged Cedric with conduct unbecoming an officer, then added a second allegation: unauthorized duplication and removal of department property. Someone had checked the download logs. They knew he'd copied the Bodycam footage. Dunmore called him in. Door closed. "You made copies of department footage without authorization. That's a terminable offense." "I copied evidence of a crime that was reported and ignored," Cedric replied. Dunmore leaned forward. "Return every copy, every file, every drive." "That's not going to happen. Talk to my attorney." He walked out. That afternoon, Nadira Qureshi filed a federal whistleblower protection motion in the Middle District of Florida, arguing the footage was material evidence in an active federal investigation and that any attempt to seize or destroy it constituted obstruction. Judge Evelyn Cortez issued a temporary restraining order within 24 hours. The department was prohibited from disciplining Cedric or destroying any body cam recordings. The order landed on Sorrento's desk like a grenade. He called Dunmore. "They've got a federal judge involved. How far did this go?" Dunmore didn't answer. Meanwhile, word reached Hargrove through a friend inside the department. The feds were asking questions. That night, Hargrove sat in his kitchen and snapped a prepaid phone in half. He drove to a gas station and threw the pieces into a dumpster. He deleted messages from a second device and wiped an email account he thought no one knew about. What he didn't know was that the FBI had already obtained everything through sealed warrants 2 weeks earlier. Every text, every call log, every transaction. The evidence he was trying to destroy had already been copied, cataloged, and stored in a federal evidence locker in Jacksonville. He was erasing ghosts. The originals were already gone. The FBI didn't need the story to go public. They needed it to go deeper. Without any press coverage, agents quietly interviewed families connected to the youth outreach program across Ocala and Marion County. 3 more families came forward within 2 weeks. The first was Gwendolyn Pratt. Her daughter, 13 at the time, had been paired with Hargrove through the mentorship track. The rides home started within a month. Then gifts: a tablet, a prepaid phone. When the girl started pulling away, skipping meals, flinching at loud noises, Gwendolyn confronted her. The girl broke down. Gwendolyn went to the police. She sat in the lobby for 2 hours. A week later, a detective told her the investigation found insufficient evidence. No one had interviewed her daughter. The second family described an identical pattern. When the mother confronted Hargrove at a community event, he showed up at her apartment the next day in full uniform. He stood in her doorway and told her that making false accusations against a police officer was a felony. She never filed a report. The third family had gone to Internal Affairs 2 full years before Amira Odom's case. Their complaint was logged, assigned a number, and closed within 11 days. No interviews, no evidence collected. Disposition unsubstantiated. The FBI now had 5 victims spanning nearly a decade. 5 families who had tried to sound the alarm. 5 times the department had shut it down. Cedric was brought back to Jacksonville for a 4-hour deposition. At the end, Castillo closed her file. "Your body cam footage is the single most important piece of evidence in this case. The first time a disclosure was captured in real time on a responding officer's own device." She paused. We're going to make sure it counts. Cedric nodded. He drove home with the windows down and the radio off. The weight hadn't lifted, but for the first time, it had shifted to somewhere it belonged. The arrest came at 5 a.m. on a Wednesday. FBI agents moved simultaneously across 3 locations. At his home on the north side of Ocala, Sergeant Vincent Hargrove was pulled from his bed in boxer shorts and an undershirt. He stood blinking under the porch light as agents cuffed him in front of neighbors who had already stepped outside at the sound of the vehicles. He was charged with multiple federal counts, including sexual exploitation of minors, coercion under color of authority, and civil rights violations. At the precinct, Lieutenant Craig Dunmore was escorted out of his office in full view of the morning shift. Officers stood frozen in the hallway as federal agents walked him past the briefing room in handcuffs. He was charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to deprive civil rights for burying Cedric's report and orchestrating retaliation against him. Captain Frank Sorrento was arrested at his home. Conspiracy. Failure to act on mandatory reporting obligations. The police chief was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Only now did the story break. Local news ran the arrests before noon. By evening, it was statewide. The details hit the public like a wall. A police sergeant running a youth program. 5 victims. A decade of abuse. A department that knew and did nothing. Protests gathered outside the Ocala Police Department by nightfall. The mayor held a press conference distancing himself from Hargrove, despite appearing beside him in promotional photos for the outreach program just 4 months earlier. He called the allegations deeply disturbing and promised full cooperation with federal authorities. Cedric watched the coverage from his apartment, alone, the television light flickering against the walls. He saw Hargrove's booking photo. He saw Dunmore's name on the screen. He saw the precinct he had worked in for 6 years, surrounded by people demanding answers. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel victory. He felt the quiet, heavy truth that everything he had endured, the isolation, the threats, the fabricated charges, had led to this single evening, and that it had almost not happened at all. The federal trial began 4 months later in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Florida. The courtroom was packed from the first morning. Prosecutors opened with Cedric's Bodycam footage. The recording played on 2 large monitors facing the jury. 12 people sat in silence as a 15-year-old girl's voice filled the room. Small, shaking, describing what a man with a badge had done to her over the course of 5 months. The footage was unedited. 14 minutes of Kayla Simmons sitting on concrete steps, pulling at her sleeves, unable to look at the camera. Rochelle standing behind her, arms crossed, tears running down her face. And Cedric's voice, steady and careful, asking the questions that no one else in his department had been willing to ask. When the footage ended, no one in the courtroom moved. Kayla testified behind a screen. Her voice was older now, harder, but it cracked in the same places. Amira Odom's mother testified via video link from Georgia, weeping as she described how the department had threatened her family into silence. 3 other victims gave statements. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, financial trails, prepaid devices, cash withdrawals matching outreach session dates. Then the prosecutors read the emails. One from Dunmore to a staff sergeant, instructing him to slow walk the Tate report and keep it off the weekly log. Another from Sorrento to Dunmore, written 11 days after Cedric filed his complaint. The words appeared on the courtroom monitors in black and white. Hargrove is too valuable to lose over teenage drama. Let it die quietly. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Dunmore and Sorrento, now cooperating for reduced sentences, each pointed the finger at the other and at Hargrove. The jury watched both men minimize their roles while the evidence proved they had actively shielded a predator. Hargrove's defense tried to discredit the victims. It didn't work. The footage existed. The records existed. The pattern was undeniable. The jury deliberated for 1 day. When they returned, the 4-person didn't look at the defense table. That told everyone in the courtroom what was coming. Guilty. On every count. The courtroom exhaled. Rochelle Simmons pressed both hands to her mouth. Two other mothers held each other in the second row. Cedric sat in the back, in civilian clothes, his hands folded in his lap. He didn't move. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The courtroom was standing room only. Judge Evelyn Cortez, the same judge who had issued the restraining order protecting Cedric's footage months earlier, presided. She addressed Hargrove directly. You were given a badge and a program designed to protect children. You used both as a hunting ground. You identified vulnerable girls. You isolated them. You abused them. And when they tried to speak, the men around you made sure no one listened. Hargrove stood motionless. His attorney had advised him to show remorse. He showed nothing. The judge continued. The officers who shielded you are not bystanders. They are participants. This court holds them accountable not because they pulled the trigger, but because they handed you the weapon and looked away while you used it. She sentenced Hargrove to 63 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence. He would die behind bars. Dunmore received 12 years for obstruction and conspiracy. Sorrento received 8. 2 additional officers who had been aware of prior complaints and failed to act received lesser sentences. A sketch artist in the front row captured Hargrove's face as the number was read. His expression was blank. His eyes were fixed on the table. He did not look at the families. He did not look at anyone. Kayla was not in the courtroom. She had asked not to be. But Rochelle was there. And when the judge's gavel came down, Rochelle closed her eyes, lowered her head, and whispered something no microphone picked up. Only she and God knew what it was. The fallout moved fast. Within weeks, the city of Ocala entered a federal consent decree. The entire youth outreach program was dissolved. Not restructured, not reformed, dissolved. A new program would be built from the ground up under civilian oversight with independent background checks, mandatory reporting protocols, and a review board with subpoena power. The police chief resigned without a public statement. His office was cleared within 48 hours. A civil lawsuit filed by the families of all 5 victims named the city, the department, and the individual officers. The case never went to trial. The city settled for a multi-million-dollar sum that legal observers described as one of the largest police misconduct payouts in Central Florida history. As part of the agreement, the department was required to release all internal affairs records related to complaints against Hargrove. What came out was staggering. 14 complaints spanning 9 years. 14 families who had come forward in some way. Not one resulted in meaningful action. Cedric was reinstated with full back pay and a formal letter clearing him of all internal charges. The fabricated evidence handling complaint was expunged from his record. But the damage was already done. 6 months of isolation, threats, a career weaponized against him for doing his job. He requested a transfer and was accepted by the Marion County Sheriff's Office. He reported to his new post on a Monday morning. New badge, new unit, same body cam. Nadira Qureshi used the case as a foundation. She filed civil rights suits on behalf of 3 other officers across Florida who had faced retaliation for reporting misconduct. Each case cited Cedric's as precedent. Each one moved forward. The system hadn't worked on its own. It had been forced to work, dragged into accountability by one officer who refused to close his eyes and one attorney who knew exactly which doors to kick open. Months later, Cedric Tate agreed to a single interview. He sat across from a journalist in a quiet room at the Marion County Sheriff's Office. Still in uniform, body cam clipped to his vest. He spoke slowly, carefully, the way he always did. People ask me if I'd do it again. He paused. I think about that question more than I should. Because the honest answer is it almost broke me. He described the loneliness, the overnight shifts in silence, the locker moved to the basement, the officers who turned their backs, the union rep who told him to think about his future. The morning Sorrento and Dunmore sat across from him and tried to take the one piece of evidence that mattered. I wasn't brave, Cedric said. I was terrified. Every single day. I just kept thinking about that girl on the steps, 15 years old, telling me the truth because she thought someone would finally do something. He looked down at his hands. If I had walked away from that, I wouldn't be able to wear this uniform. I wouldn't deserve to. He talked about Amira, the girl whose family had been run out of the state, the complaint that was buried years before Kayla ever sat on those steps. She never got justice the first time, Cedric said. That stays with me. He said the system didn't work. People made it work. By refusing to look away, by keeping copies when they were told to delete, by walking into federal offices when their own department shut the door. The interview ended quietly. No dramatic statement, no rehearsed closing line. Just a man in uniform who had done what the men above him refused to do, and paid for it in ways most people would never see. The piece closes with Cedric walking through the Marion County Sheriff's Office at the start of a new shift. Bodycam on, red light steady. He steps into his patrol car, adjusts his mirror, and pulls out of the lot. The narrator's voice returns. Vincent Hargrove will die in federal prison. The officers who protected him lost their badges, their freedom, and their names. And a 15-year-old girl's trembling voice on a body cam recording, footage that was nearly seized, nearly buried, nearly erased, brought down an entire chain of command. Not because the system worked, because one man wouldn't let it fail. If you think this situation was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right-hand side.